Hey! Box from the bookshelf, and we're gonna learn about our dogs. And box from the bookshelf, and we're gonna learn together. Box from the bookshelf, we're gonna learn about our dogs. And box from the bookshelf, kick out. Hey!
So I am joined today by the wonderful Dr. Angela Perri. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This subject is endlessly fascinating. I think for a lot of dog trainers, we are constantly thinking about why dogs do what they do and what maybe led them to be the dogs that they are today. And of course, this is or arguably the very beginning of that. I thought I'd kick off with a question before we get into the whys, wheres, and all of those interesting questions. I thought I'd kick off with a question about you, Angela, if you don't mind. So,
yeah.
Why dogs? What led you into this field?
Yeah, well, I imagine like a lot of your listeners and people in your world of dog trainers, I grew up with dogs. I was a crazy dog fanatic all my life. My parents had a dog before I was even born. So I came into a house with a dog. I never knew a life without having dogs in my house. And when, I went into archaeology and anthropology, and I realized you could study both ancient history and animals, and that I could make a life and a career out of studying dogs. Well, I thought, well, why not? That sounds like you get paid to talk about dogs all the time. That's a great option. So yeah, that's what I decided to do. And, I went down the rabbit hole of dog domestication and early relationships between humans and dogs. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized we know very little about that. And so that became my thing. Yeah.
And you spent a little bit of time in the UK.
I did. I lived in the UK for quite a while. My husband is British. I went to school at Durham. So I've spent quite a long time in the UK. Yeah.
Fabulous. And what has it shaped what it means to you to be like? I can't imagine, with all of the knowledge that you have about where dogs have come from and all of the things that you must constantly be thinking about in your brain. If you're in the presence of a dog, does it shape the way you are with dogs? Are you all just the same? Do you gaze into their eyes and all these questions are popping into your mind as you're looking at a dog?
I mean, yeah, I think that anyone who has dogs, knows dogs, likes dogs, even if you don't like dogs, you have this sense that there's something between humans and dogs that's hard to put your finger on what that is. There's clearly something that's happened evolutionarily between the two species that has formed this, the whole dogs are man's best friend that didn't come out of nowhere, right? There's this sense that we've had a long journey together and that we've kind of evolved together in a way that kind of binds us. We have this unspoken, relationship that even, when I meet a new dog, anyone who's a dog person, you meet a new dog and you immediately have a sense of who they are from their personality, almost the way you would with a human, right? You kind of sense their vibe. You kind of suss out whether they're kind of a skittish dog or a really friendly dog, or, if they're the type of dog that looks to go and sit in the corner alone, or the type of dog wants to jump on you and be on your lap. And, I think they're kind of an extension of who we are as humans. And that's why I'm really interested in dogs. And I think that the closest thing you can get to studying humans and our own evolution and our journey through the past is studying dogs. They've been with us for so long, and their history is the history of mankind. So I think that's pretty unique. There's no other animal that has that type of relationship with us.
Yeah, you made me think that, because we often talk about the sort of innate ability for humans to understand dogs, because dogs communicate in so many ways, but one of the main ways they communicate is with body language. And a lot of humans, not all, but a lot of humans seem to see a dog and kind of understand them, even sometimes when they're communicating quite subtly. And that kind of maybe speaks to that, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years that we may be co-inhabiting or Yeah.
I think so. I saw a really interesting kind of study that took a bunch of humans and had them listen to the sounds of dogs making
Mm.
various noises and barks. And, you know, our innate ability to understand just from hearing a bark of a dog that we've never met, you know, is that dog stressed? Is that dog happy? Is that dog overwhelmed? You know, all these things that we kind of innately understand from a dog's body language or their vocalizations is quite interesting and a unique thing, I think, between us and dogs. Like, why do we understand that? Why can we, you know, innately take the sound of dog that we've never met before is making and understand, you know, what it's thinking? So yeah, fascinating.
So let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit then. Our dog training community is quite famous, well, at least within it, for its debates and differing opinions on how things are and what should be done. When researching this topic, I kind of found out there's similar debates go on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, about domestication. And that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating, I think, is that there are these sort of debates. So can you shed some light for us on why there is a debate on where dogs were domesticated as a starter?
Yeah, so I think that first and foremost, do any of us want to be part of a community where everything's sorted out and like there are no questions or debates? That's not very fun. So I love that when I got into dogs, you know, there were a lot of these questions. I think first and foremost, it starts at the very beginning of understanding what domestication is. We don't even have agreement amongst us in archaeology and those of us who are zooarchaeologists, people who study animals and human and animal interactions, of what domestication is. Obviously, we have domestications that are intentional, coming from the human side. We took an animal that was wild and we thought, okay, we can do this. We can domesticate this animal. Because we'd seen it being done before. Dogs, as far as we know, were the first domesticate. So we didn't have a blueprint of what that looked like with dogs. So how did we do it? Why did we do it? Did we do it intentionally, or was it something that just happened through a process? So I always try to encourage people to not think of domestication as an event, but as a process. And the process of domestication of dogs may have had many, many, many starts and stops, right? I'm sure, you know, where you are, where everyone who's listening here in the US, we have people who take in wild animals, you know, raccoons, foxes, skunks, all sorts of mountain lions, all sorts of animals, right? Why do we not have domesticated raccoons and possums and all of these things, right? Domestication is very much a process that involves an intense time frame and intense attempts to do something, to produce an end result over generations and generations and generations. So I think that identifying the timing, the location, and the source population in which that process kind of caught hold and really took off, right, is really difficult. An early dog looks exactly like a wolf also, right? Humans and wolves have had interactions for tens of thousands of years, right? We lived in the same environment, we hunted the same things in the same locations. It's not uncommon for us to find wolves at human archaeological sites. Are those dogs? Were they early attempts at dogs? Were they just wolves? This is very difficult for us to kind of suss out. And a lot of the debate around early dogs or locations of early dogs is that it's not only the skeletal morphology, the bones of the animals that are hard to differentiate, but the DNA as well. The DNA, you know, is often really inconclusive. It looks like, you know, there's no line in which you cross and you say, oh, that tells us that's a dog and that tells us that's a wolf. Like humans, you know, dog DNA and wolf DNA are only, you know, a 0.2% difference between them. And, you know, you have hybrids, you have dogs now that are interbreeding with wolves. And are they a dog? Are they a wolf? Are they a wolf dog? No. So a lot of these things are tangled up in our conception of what a domestic animal is, our conception of what a dog is. You know, I love questions about taming and rewilding. And if you have, you know, feral or free-ranging dogs, what does that mean? You know, at what point do they become non-dogs, you know, and then go back into like the kind of wild world? It's a great debate around dingoes of, you know, we know that dingoes are dogs, domesticated dogs, but they behave and they interact like a wild animal, right? So I think we have so many great, crazy questions around dogs that are so unique to just them and our relationship with them.
Do you find yourself ever sort of looking at like foxes, for example, and kind of seeing like, oh my God, it's happening like live now? So because in the
Yeah,
UK we have like loads of urban foxes. I don't know
loads.
exactly what it's like over here, but I imagine a lot of the, you know, a lot of what you would have seen maybe in those early days of them coming into sort of like human settlements, maybe getting less fearful, and them being less fearful comes along with some other traits, and then the population of foxes that's in the urban environment is removing itself from the population of foxes that is in the country, even in a
Yeah.
small country like the UK. You're seeing that. Does that sort of fascinate? Oh, I'm sure it does fascinate you as well.
Yeah, I think you're hitting really the nail on the head of exactly what is the kind of foremost theory on domestication of dogs. Not that it was an intentional, you know, humans didn't look at wolves and say, okay, we're going to take this dangerous carnivore predator that is our competition and we're going to turn it into the first domesticate, right? Again, no concept of what a domesticate is at that point. And so I think exactly like we see with urban foxes, where they've kind of found their way in our within our lifestyle. They don't cause us too many problems. They kill some cats or something like that, but they don't cause us too many problems. And so it's not worth it to us to try to flush them out and keep them out of the cities. So we just allow them to coexist. We see it all the time with, you know, communities in Alaska, for example, that kind of live with bears. They're not safe and they don't necessarily want it to happen, but bears really love, you know, dumps and trash piles. And the more we dump, the more they're attracted to it. And we've gotten to the point where it's not worth it to us unless they start really causing problems. It's not worth it to us to continuously run them out. So we just find a way to live our lives with them on the perimeter, right? And as long as they don't do anything too crazy, they don't come into town and kill someone or do something like that, we kind of exist with them. We coexist with them on the outskirts. And we do this with a lot of, you know, a lot of places around the world have wild animals that are fairly dangerous, but don't pose an immediate threat, that we just kind of let live on the outside. And exactly like you're saying, just like urban foxes in the UK, those populations begin to rely on humans, whether we like it or not. They rely on us for sustenance. And they, generation after generation after generation, those urban foxes become unable to live in the wild, right? Because their form of supporting themselves, of resourcing, is completely related to their interdependency on humans, right? And I'm very much a believer that animals have culture as well. And, you know, I've seen this a lot in my work. For example, you have, you know, you see it, you hear a lot about it in orca whales, or in white-tailed deer, or animals that are used to hunting or eating a certain type of food. They tend to breed with other animals who do the same thing. And, you know, there's orca whales over here who are used to hunting seals, and ones over here that are used to hunting, you know, something else. And those two don't necessarily interbreed. They don't necessarily cross paths because they're not the same type. They don't have the same culture, right? And so you can imagine a scenario exactly as you said with foxes, where urban foxes no longer know how to be a wild fox.
Yeah.
And wild foxes aren't interested in coming into the city and existing that close to humans and that type of environment. And so, as you said, they slowly separate out genetically, physically, behaviorally. They start to have these separations, and those urban foxes become a group that can no longer be right? A wild fox. And successive generations of urban fox kits would have no idea how to live in the wild, right? Without that human environment. So I think that's exactly what happened with dogs.
There's also been some interesting stuff. I think of the fur foxes experiment that where it's shown that actually, I know I was reading about this today, and actually there's a bit of controversy about that, about where the foxes came from originally. But just regarding that, what that seemed to show was it can happen over quite a short period of time in terms of, in terms of generations as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those experiments with Belayev and that whole group who are still undertaking, that work, I think that they showed that if you have a goal and if you are intensive about putting those pressures on that population, that very quickly, I think it was within, 8-9 generations, you started to see floppy tails or floppy ears, curling tails, coat pattern changes, definitely changes in response and behavior of the foxes very quickly. And now if you have, however many thousands of dollars, you can get yourself a Siberian fox, fully domesticated Siberian fox. And I think that they showed this, particularly in canids and in these types of animals, that they have some propensity towards it. And if you try hard enough, the outcome could be, a domesticated animal. We have other animals that we've really, really, really tried with. Zebras, gazelles, they've really tried hard to domesticate. They just don't take to it, right? For whatever reason. Canids seem to. There's some evidence that that in South America in particular, that native populations there, indigenous populations, may have had an interesting relationship with native foxes and some of these kind of canid groups that are falling outside of the typical, dog in terms of domestication. So yeah, I think that farm fox experiment is really interesting in showing us that it can be done if you have a pathway and an intention to do it. It's tricky to apply that to dogs because we know that there wouldn't have been an intention, but you can see that over time processes that we're describing in that separation of a group that eventually does lead to all the physical and behavioral changes that they saw in that farm fox experiment.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And so we believe that all dogs come from one, I've got to get this right in my head, from one kind of isolated pack of wolves, or isolated group of wolves is probably the best way of putting it, is it? That are now extinct. Is that the right way to say that? Or we have no evidence of this population still existing?
It's tricky because this is one of the great questions that we would like to resolve, but I think it's fun that we haven't resolved it yet. But we don't know the source population. What we know is that so far of all the modern and ancient wolf populations that we've tested, none of them are the source population for modern dogs. We haven't found that source population yet, which suggests a lot of things. It suggests first that it's probably a small population, and that also it's probably a population in some kind of isolated location that hasn't, because we've tested many, 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 many wolves, right? Ancient and modern, and we've yet to find it. And so we did a paper a couple of years ago suggesting that there's a lot of stuff going on in Siberia, in that area, we know, during the time period in which dogs were domesticated, and that it's most likely that that kind of Siberian area, the far eastern kind of Siberian area, is most likely where that population was sourced from, and quite a small population, and probably a population that is now, extinct, that's gone extinct, but that we've yet to pinpoint exactly, where that group is. We don't have a sample from that group yet.
So you're saying that a group of humans found themselves in a similar kind of space with this population of wolves, and this was during a time when the climate was pretty bad. So they were forced into this area, and that may be because wolves would have been
Yeah.
around for years and years and years.
Yeah.
But that forcing of them being together was maybe the catalyst that started the domestication process.
Exactly. I mean, these are the things I think about in the shower. Everyone has like a thing that they just like dwell on in the shower. These are the things I think about. The why now question, why? We spent tens of thousands of years with wolves. Why now? So it's probably a combination of things. During the time period that we're talking about, 25,000 years ago, humans are starting to settle down a little bit more. And I think that settling down is part of domestication, is that if you're constantly in motion, you're a hunter-gatherer, constantly moving, that being in close contact with a population of wolves for long enough for something like that to happen is unlikely. In our paper, we said that we propose that area of far eastern Siberia, which at the time was called Beringia. So it was this kind of ice bridge that led to the peopling of the Americas eventually. But that was the kind of last big ice age, right? Things were pretty nasty in Eurasia, but we know that area of Beringia is where we have a lot of kind of isolated populations of humans and animals that kind of went there as a refuge because it was a little bit better than the rest of Eurasia. And we think they kind of got isolated there. They stayed in this area for thousands and thousands of years because it was kind of the best of the worst places to live at that time. And like humans, animal populations would have kind of isolated themselves there as well. And we think it's most likely that a human population isolated there came into close contact with a wolf population that also isolated themselves there. That domestication probably occurred during that time, and that once that ice age kind of dissipated and people repopulated, they went both east over the land bridge into the Americas, and they went back west, back down into the rest of Europe and Asia, and that those groups brought dogs with them in both directions, into the Americas and then back down into the rest of Eurasia. And that the reason that we see that all dogs come from a single source population, but they're everywhere across the world, is that it came from one location and it's spreading from that one location back into the rest of the world.
That's the hot theory right now, then, is it? I'm guessing there's
it's my theory, so can I call it the hot theory? Yes, it's the hot theory. Yeah.
But it seems to make sense, doesn't it? Because I know people have talked about that it happened in many different areas at slightly different times. And that, of course, that could be possible when you think about it, but then your kind of theory
seems unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's hard to believe.
Yeah, to happen that many times in that, like maybe once or twice sort of thing, but yeah. And it really, like, what it would have been like coming out of that ice age and then spreading across it, and then of course those dogs would have then had such an effect on the other population of animals as they're spreading out across.
Exactly.
They would have been interbreeding with, they would have been interbreeding with wolves. Yeah. So that would make
spreading
it really,
disease,
really
interbreeding with wolves, having an interesting impact on human hunting and on, hunting is my kind of specialty, and thinking through the things you can suddenly do now with a dog, and as far as transport, sledding, as far as hunting, as far as a dog acting as, an alarm system, a bed warmer, a nanny, all these things that we use dogs for. Suddenly you have this kind of like, Swiss Army knife of a helper that can do all sorts of things, right? They can act as an emergency food source or emergency fur source. So really, I think once we got on board with like, hey, these like tame wolves are pretty useful, that it probably just caught fire, everywhere, that, you see your neighbor has this new fangled thing. It's a dog. It's pulling them across the tundra much faster than you're walking. And suddenly you think, no, I need one of those.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, exactly. I think I always think of early dogs as a tool, as technology. And I think if you suddenly see your neighbor out hunting you because their dog is tracking down some deer that you just shot, then you suddenly think like, wait a minute, you know, I need one of those. And we see that in modern, you know, indigenous populations, that the giving of puppies of like a good hunting dog is a sign of, you know, you really respect someone. You're giving them this technology, you're passing along this kind of tool to help them, you know, assist them in transport or hunting or something else, livestock guarding dogs, things like that. So it really does become not only technology, but this like thing that binds us as humans. So yeah, it's fascinating. I think it feels like, from what we know from the archaeological record, that dogs, once they caught on, spread very quickly, and then you don't have anywhere in the world that humans went that dogs didn't. They're just everywhere. They're alongside us every single place we went.
I had a really funny thing happen the other day. I was on Facebook, and a friend, an acquaintance of mine, had posted, and he was posting about a story basically, and his son had, a dog had growled and snapped at him at a family party. I think he was overhandling the dog or something like that. But anyway, he'd gone onto Facebook annoyed about this sort of situation, and he just put on there, "What is the point of dogs? You know, aren't we past dogs now? Can't we just get rid of dogs now? You know, what is the point of them?" I'm kind of sort of sat there thinking, this long line of noble animals that has literally helped humans be successful across eons, you know, and now it's down to just people going on Facebook going, "What is the point of dogs?" You know. So I thought,
Still do so many populations that are dependent on livestock guarding dogs or hunting dogs or dogs for protection, or think about all the things, you know. When I was at Durham last, they were doing experimental work on COVID sniffing dogs for testing, or, you know, all the military dogs, police dogs, dogs for hearing and blindness, all the amazing things that dogs, you know, do for us. And also, like, I won't discount that, you know, there's a reason that toy dogs or companion dogs are a whole subset of, you know, AKC and WKC, all these things, is that dogs as companions is you know, the emotional relationship is critical. We have so many really amazing, interesting archaeological documentations of my favorite example is histories of Roman women going with their Roman officer husbands to these far-flung places. You know, we're outposted in Tunisia. There's a great example of this old decrepit lap dog that was excavated in Tunisia, just full of every arthritic, no teeth, all of the things, and clearly was like this beloved dog that this Roman woman had brought with her to a far-flung outpost of the Roman Empire, and was clearly like this, you know, emotional security blanket for this Roman wife, probably. And so, you know, there's these amazing stories of how, you know, dogs, they start out as tools, but they become very quickly, I think, these kind of emotional placeholders for us, these members of our family and domestic life. So I think, you know, my PhD was talking about dog burials and the way that people kind of revered their dogs. And so we see it very, very early in the archaeological record, dogs being buried just like humans. So I think that emotional relationship between us and dogs was kind of there from the beginning.
Have you ever read the book called, I think it's called Dog is Love by Clive
Yeah.
Wing?
Yeah, Clive is a good friend of mine. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. He's been on our podcast before, and
great.
to talk about Dog is Love. Yeah, and that was my first kind of introduction into this idea that dogs have been buried in such a way. Was that a do you see a lot of that across the world in different areas, a lot of similar stuff?
Yeah, you do. You see it everywhere. It's really, really common in hunting communities, both modern and ancient hunting communities, where I think that dogs are seen really as a valued member of the group. If you can pass off the work of humans to a dog and free up those humans to do other tasks, then that's really invaluable. You see it in livestock guarding dog communities. Yeah, you see it everywhere, and you see modern examples in indigenous communities of dogs being highly valued for doing different things as well. And there's so many great examples of like seeing anthropological examples of people doing plans of what their house looks like, and showing like this is where my bed is, this is where the family beds are, and this is where the dog area is, right? And we see that across the board. We see it in communities that are living in, you know, kind of rainforest communities. We see it in Arctic communities where they always have some special shelter, sun shelter or snow shelters that they build for the dogs. So I think this idea of like special burials, special housing, special food items, all that kind of stuff in relationship to dogs is not a modern invention. You know, a lot of people I hear say like, oh, we treat our dogs like, you know, dogs have it pretty great now. Most of our dogs don't do much but provide, you know, that emotional the emotional support. But people have been treating their dogs, you know, special for a long, long time.
I think you kind of speak to something that I wanted to ask you about there, because I think in a way there's you know, dogs have got it really, really good, but in another way, a lot of behavior problems that we see as dog trainers, I think, arise from the fact that their needs aren't being met, or, you know, their purpose has not been met in terms of what they were bred for. So they get quite frustrated. I'm looking at that picture behind you there because I went down a little wormhole when I was doing a bit of research about this, because I heard you talking about, so that's for people who are listening, and there's a wonderful picture behind Angela at the moment of a cave, of some cave art, and that is that the one that's in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, this one is from Saudi Arabia. It's a big rock art panel of lots and lots of dogs with hunters and leashes, and yeah, clearly the dogs are excited and ready to go.
It's absolutely fascinating. And is that the earliest depiction we have of dogs hunt where clearly they're hunting?
Yeah.
Aren't they? You can't mistake that in any way.
You can't mistake it. It's pretty amazing. The guys have bows. They've got leashes attached to them with some of the dogs. It's clear they're on the hunt. The dogs are all faced in the same direction and clearly going after things. You've got dogs of different sizes, with different coloring, and
it feels to me like because of that purpose that they had, and that and you know, hunting, whatever the you describe it. I love the term Swiss Army knife that you describe them as, that, or whatever they're doing, whatever purpose they're doing, that's coexisting and providing them with obviously food, safety, shelter, but us with equally as much food, safety, and shelter. It seems to me that is kind of, I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because domestic dogs make up a very small part of the population of dogs across the globe, doesn't it? So I have a very biased view of the dogs that I come into contact with. But those ones there, I think sometimes it's going a little bit too far the other way. I always think there was a massive drop off, I guess, when agriculture came in, of dogs being used for things like hunting. And I always think that might have been a sad time if you were a dog. It might be, oh, I haven't got a job anymore, you know.
It was a sad time. The very end part of my PhD is about this transition to agriculture and how you see this kind of shift of like, you know, dogs being buried in these elaborate ways, to starting to see dogs being butchered and thrown into trash piles. And so there is that shift. You know, you're saying, the guy is saying, what do we need dogs for anymore? I think we had some of those transitions in history of like, hey, we're not hunting anymore. We've got wheat and corn. What do we need dogs for anymore? We can start like eating them. But then, right, there's an uptick again. Oh, suddenly we realize dogs are really useful for herding animals. And we realize they're really useful for protection and guarding. And we realize they're really useful for, you know, whether we like it or not, dogs of war and these kinds of things. And yeah, they're so malleable. We can train them to do almost anything, right? We can unfortunately turn a dog into this kind of aggressive, mean guard dog or dog of war that like the Spanish used coming into the Americas.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, humans have always picked up on those, you know, kind of intricacies and personality traits that certain groups of dogs eventually kind of moved into these different spaces and move into different behavioral types and different physical attributes. And, you know, people starting to use certain types of dogs for hunting and of gazelle and super fast animals in, you know, in places like Saudi Arabia, or, you know, big furry warm dogs for things in the Arctic or something like that. So I think, you know, that's where these variations started to come in, where people, you know, maybe at one point it was just dog. A dog is a dog is a dog. And then we start to get this variation in types of dogs and behavioral traits and attributes and genetic mutations and variations. You know, I'm a Westie person. You know, the story of why a Westie is white, and how it became that way, and the absolute enjoyable attitude of a terrier. You know,
Yeah.
I just love that. And like, terrier cannot be mistaken with any other dog. It's terrier, and you can't explain why a terrier is the way it is. It just is. It's a terrier. You know, I love all those little intricacies that have been bred through this relationship with humans and dogs over time.
We share our lives with a terrier as well, called she's called Penny, but we call her Penguin. And
You have a boss.
Yes, so 100%. We actually moved house for her. We moved into rural Wales just to make her life a little bit easier. But her character is just the best. It's just the best. She makes us laugh every day without fail. She's wonderful. Okay, just going back very quickly, because all of you said earlier on that it's quite hard to identify these dogs, you know, the transition of dogs back in time. And for someone thinking about them, I think that's a bit crazy because of how many breeds we have today. It must be easy to sort of pick up a skull and go, well, that's a dog because that's a Chihuahua. But obviously there wasn't a Chihuahua back then.
Yeah.
That's come much later. And to identify through skeletal remains is quite tricky, because you can only really do it, I might be speaking out of turn here, but you only really do it by size. There's some teeth and ear, maybe things that might identify them. So it's led to some sort of debate. I was looking up today that the only, this could be wrong as well because this is Dr. Google here, but the only confirmed domestic dog skeletal remains is a jawbone that's from 14,000 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, 14, 15,000 is kind of our threshold in which the skeletal remains and the DNA are different enough that we can 100% confidently say there's separation here from a wolf. Before that, it's really, really tricky. It's really tricky to say from the physical remains, the skeletal remains, that's definitely not within the scope of variation for a wolf, right? Because we have big wolves, we have small wolves, we have wolves that have all sorts of, you know, issues with their teeth and changes to their physical bodies. So, you know, we're dealing with an animal that's just as plastic as we are as humans physically, right? In the Arctic, you get these huge timber wolves. And then in places like Portugal or Mexico, you have these much smaller warm weather wolves. And so there's just so much variation within wolves themselves that what we can agree on is somewhere around 15,000 years ago, genetically and physically. That's kind of where we're at. What we identified in our recent paper in Siberia is that we can see that we have a lineage of dogs that splits genetically from another lineage of dogs around 23,000 years ago. So the only reason we feel confident when we have dogs around 23,000 years ago is we can see a genetic split of a ghost population. We don't have the physical remains of these dogs. We have 2 later period dogs that we can see have a split around 23,000 years ago. But those early remains of definite dogs are really, they're still a mystery to us where they are.
So that split, they came from another dog.
Right. The only way you have 2 dog populations split is they must have been a dog. So it's purely through this kind of molecular clock backdating of timing from the genetics that we can see that there's a split between these 2 populations that we know are dog populations. But we don't have that a bone of that 23,000 year old dog. We can just see that there was a genetic split from those populations. So again, Siberia, not the easiest place for archaeological excavation, but I'm sure that Siberia holds a lot of fascinating secrets. It has some amazing archaeology and paleontology coming out of the frozen tundra there. Some incredibly well-preserved stuff from, you know, tens of thousands of years ago. So I'm confident that at some point one of those will be a early dog, but we haven't gotten there yet.
So you've spent a bit of time hunting in various locations. That must have given you a real insight into why dogs were starting to be used for hunting, and what kind of things dogs are successful at in terms of hunting with humans. Because I think a lot of people would imagine that, because we get all mixed up. I know I do anyway, so I'm assuming other people do, but maybe it's just me. But when you get all mixed up, when you start thinking about ancient history and all these different, like, you know, time frames when animals were alive, I'm thinking like humans were domesticating dogs around the time when giant animals were around, like mammoths and things along those lines. Would that be a fair assumption to make, or are we looking a bit later when all of those animals would have been extinct, maybe?
Yeah, if we're right about 23,000 years ago, we are in the time period of megafauna, right? So we're in the time period of people, you know, mammoths and mastodons and woolly rhinos and all these types of animals. But we're getting close to the end of the Ice Age, which is the end of the Ice Age is when we kind of switch into a different type of hunting, because the Ice Age kind of changes the environment. The end of the Ice Age, we see an increase in warmer weather, warmer temperature forests start to come in, the deciduous forests start to flourish. And with those forests, you know, those big fauna need those wide open plains of kind of polar tundra. Once that starts to go, that's when the megafauna go extinct, and we start to see faster, more difficult, smaller animals like deer and boar and things like that that people start hunting during that time period, where we enter the period we're in now, which is called the Holocene, right? And so this is just a generally warmer temperature time period. And if you imagine a scenario in which you and all of the generations before you have been, you know, mammoth hunters, and suddenly you are encountering, you know, dense forested environments with quick, difficult prey like deer and boar, and smaller, you know, much smaller animals, and that requires this kind of change in the way that you hunt. And yeah, I know hunting is a controversial topic, especially with dogs. And my interest is purely in ancient hunting techniques and how people use dogs as technology to improve their hunting success, because hunter-gatherer lifestyle is risky. It's difficult. It's you know, every day you have to be on top of hunting to keep the family fed and, you know, moving around to find different animal populations continuously. And I think, you know, some of the work that I've done with modern hunters, you know, hunting boar in the forests of Japan was terrifying. Anyone who's hunted boar in dense forests, I would assume, has the same thought that it's scary. It's when they say, you know, a boar coming at you in a forest really sounds like a train. It's true, and you don't know
Right.
where it is, and you don't know where it's coming from, but a dog does, and that's really helpful. So, you know, a dog stopping a boar, cornering a boar, keeping it, you know, treed, so that you can go in for the kill is really, really important. And boar and other dangerous animals like that are the types of animals that you hear hunters, modern indigenous hunters, you know, not people with a sight rifle, but modern indigenous hunters saying, you know, if it weren't for our dogs, we wouldn't even bother going after these animals because they're too fast or they're too dangerous. It's too difficult, you know. Things like ibex, hunting ibex, they are really fast and really dangerous. And it's not something you want to do without a buffer between you and the animal, like a dog. So I think a dog, in terms of hunting, really opened up so many more opportunities for hunters that would frankly not go after dangerous or quick or difficult animals.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing. You don't want to be stuck in a forest chasing a boar with just a pointy
You
stick.
do
You mean that?
not. No,
I'll take your word for it,
you
Angela, I
don't.
think.
I mean, it's in front of you before you know it because the environment is just so dense. And that's not a place you want to be, is with a boar, you know, flying at you without a dog in between you and the boar.
It's no wonder that they were so quickly revered and buried like
Mm,
they were, and because you're actually putting your safety in the hands of another animal, maybe the
you
first time
are,
that's
yeah,
ever been done in human history. So
yeah,
that across species divide is just, I just got shivers down my spine thinking about it. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's absolutely fascinating.
yeah, yeah. And imagine, you know, you hear the same thing. It's not just hunting, you hear the same thing. You know, a livestock guarding dogs
Yeah.
are the same. You know, how could we ever protect a herd of 100 sheep with, you know, we would have to stay up day and night, you know, like shepherds used to do, sitting out there. And what we can do with a dog alone, the things they can hear that we can't hear, the things they can smell that we can't
Mhm.
smell. You know, I always talk about when I write papers about dogs' superhuman, literally superhuman abilities, because I can't hear or smell or do any of the things that I can't blood trail. I can't do that. So all these things that a dog can just do innately, just I'm a dog. I smell better than you. I hear better than you. I can track a blood trail of an animal. Um, are really superhuman powers that we are really taking advantage of, right? And so I'm not surprised when I see dogs being revered in these communities, both ancient and modern. You know, if you talk to communities in the Alps who still use dogs regularly for livestock guarding, they can't do it without a dog. And why would they? Why would they even attempt it without a dog? It just makes life so much easier um, in terms of herding and protection, things like that.
Their adaptability has has been their success, hasn't it? Really, and that's
Yeah.
in all facets of their lives. It is, yeah, it's such a wonderful topic. So let me start to wrap things up a little bit. I have another question that's kind of slightly off piste a little bit, because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole with archaeology earlier in the year, and I think kind of you have a similar kind of thing in the archaeological community as we have in the dog training and behavior sort of realm, which is like an issue with maybe sort of misinformation and mainstream
Mm,
things coming out. I'm thinking,
mm.
obviously there was the big thing with Graham Hancock and
Oh
his
yeah.
massive Netflix series. um I've actually really enjoyed you saying about how you love the fact that there's more questions and things like that, and I guess that those the benefits of people, like, not picking on Graham Hancock particularly, but he's one that I know that a lot of people might have heard of, is it gets a lot more eyes on archaeology. It gets a lot more
Mm.
people thinking about it. Um, do you see those sorts of things as being a problem for the science of archaeology moving forward, or do you kind of embrace that in a way, or does it matter? Is it a problem at
I
all?
mean, we won't say that as archaeologists, we're not annoyed by those things, right? Just like anyone, you know, if someone comes along and says like, all the things that they're saying are wrong, none of them know what they're talking about. I'm right.
Yeah.
We, you know, we of course we're innately like frustrated. by that. But you know, any chance for archaeology to get, you know, like all arts and sciences, we are always at threat of being underfunded and underutilized and people not understanding what we do. So any opportunity for archaeology and ancient history to be part of some kind of, you know, public narrative, I'm happy about. And I think most archaeologists, you know, we're scientists, we go by the data. And most of us are thrilled about being wrong. I mean, me being wrong about my Siberian 23,000 gives me an opportunity to write 5 more papers and do more research and dig into it even further. So I love when people write a paper saying, I don't agree with Angela Perri. Great. Like, let's have that. That's more of a conversation. And I think most of the people that I work with, you know, what we're doing here is we're not saying we have the answers. We're putting in one more puzzle piece into a really big puzzle, right? And maybe that puzzle piece was ill-fitted, you know, but largely we don't like to attach our names to something if we haven't done a lot of research into it and a lot of confidence that what we're saying is probably correct. And we put theories out there for the exact purpose of people to try to prove us wrong, because that advances the science, right? That's what we want. We want it. I don't care what the end result of when, where, how dogs were domesticated. I just want to get there, you know, and every puzzle piece that we put in is a piece of advancing us closer to understanding. Maybe I'm right about this one and I'm wrong about that one, but someone else comes up with the right answer to the how question. Great. Like, we're getting closer, right? We're all pushing each other to get better and better and better and closer to providing answers to this question of you know, dogs. And I think sometimes people say, like, why, what a waste of time. Why do we care about dogs? Why do we need to fund archaeology to look into dogs or any of the rest of this? But like we've been talking about, it's a fundamental part of who we are as humans, right? A fundamental part of our evolution, of our journey to where we are now, sitting on my couch with my Westies at their beck and call, just like, what do you want? So what can I provide you? Why are my Westies white? Why are all Westies white? What is that? What is that about? Why have we done that as humans? You know, why is my Westie, you know, 15 pounds and chirpy? And you got, you know, my friend just visited me with a mountain dog that is giant and hairy and slobbery and just has the most like chill personality, you know. And I've got a Westie who's talking back, and a mountain dog that's just, you know, we're like, why? How did that happen? What a mystery. And how did they all come from a wolf? It's, I mean, this is part of who we are as humans, and we should care about that, and we should want to have debates about it and want to like go back and forth about it, and I welcome it.
I think that's definitely a mic drop moment there, Angela. Right, two very quick, short fire questions. Yes. One, if someone was to ring you tomorrow and say, we found something that's going to blow your mind about the domestication of dogs, what would you wish it would be? What would be the thing you would it be that ghost dog, you know, that we talked about? Would it be evidence of that? What might it be that would really like blow your mind?
Let's find ghost dog. Yes. Ghost dog, number one.
Number one. Yeah. Okay, fabulous. And last question, and we ask this of all of our guests, because this is ultimately a book review podcast, we go off piece sometimes to review interesting characters while you are here. Could you recommend a book for our listeners to read? Doesn't have to be about dog training as such, but a book that might get them really into the archaeology or the domestication side of things. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Ooh. I mean, I wouldn't say that we have a great one that is related directly to archaeology, but I mean, I read a lot of behavioral books. It's probably standard for you guys, but like Off the Leash is just like a really classic book that I love. Clive's books on dogs. You know, we talk a lot about archaeology, so he involves a lot of the kind of archaeological side, the historical side of dogs. But a lot of our archaeology books are frankly like in that kind of academic book space where not really like accessible to a lot of people. So I think that's actually something that we should work on, is the kind of archaeology side of books that are more publicly accessible to people.
There you go. New project.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely brilliant. Can I take a quick screenshot? Just a quick one of us waving. 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to speak to you again at some point, but thank you so much for doing this.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Have a good one.
Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.